move this down. Oh, shoot. Darn it. I don't know what I did. Let me see. Well, I tried to be cute here, Jess, and now I got multiple stuff up. Got that. I got to get the share screen back here. Maybe I'll minimize this. Let me try to minimize this. All right, let's try that. Let's try this. Share.
Well, that works. I can see your desktop.
You can see my desktop.
Yep. So now you just need to go into Safari. Yep.
Okay.
You got it. That's it.
Well, this is the first one. I hope I can get the second one up.
They're up there at the top, Tony. I can see them.
Yeah, I put them all up today to make sure I had them up there. Once I get this screen big, though, I may have trouble getting them back. So I'm glad you're here.
Okay. Every now and then I'll come in clutch.
Well, I think it's a little more often than every now and then, but
yeah. So how's packing going?
oh my goodness. I just had a bit of a hiatus because I had to go to Columbus for some healthcare stuff for 3 days in a row. So I just got back this afternoon. So it'll all start again tomorrow.
Yeah.
In earnest for 11 days. And then I hope we're going to be down there a lot more than we're up here. We'll probably list the house. So they started my new dahlia garden.
That's exciting.
It's really exciting. Really exciting.
Is Chris gonna come and drop your dirt off?
Yeah, I'm trying to. It's kind of my insurance thing that at least I can plant the dahlias in my old soil and then hope the new soil, if they don't like it, they'll just kind of stay in my old soil. You know, plants are smart like that. I think they'll figure it out that, hey, we just better keep our roots in this zone and not go out there. But I don't know, I did a lot of talking to the people. There's a really great organic, they make organic compost down. They've been doing it for 25 years. And so I think we got the formula that'll work for, I don't have 30 years to build soil like I did here. So it's got to be real expedited.
Yeah.
But with the products they have, I think I can do it. We're going to find out.
Challenge accepted.
Oh, then I had cuttings down there under lights in the other house, and I have seedlings up here. So today I brought the cuttings that I'm going to take back up here, and I'm going to have to move everything in 11 days back there. So I've got 2 light setups, one over here and one down there. Sometimes I look in the mirror and I just say, what happened to you? You know, when did this happen? I mean, when did you lose your grip?
Tony, you're talking to somebody who's insane. So like none of this sounds
my living room doesn't look like yours. Jackie wouldn't have it. I think I'd be out with the cats.
Yeah. Nick isn't allowed to have an opinion on it. So.
Tony, you're watching us turn into you and you're not stopping us.
Yeah,
I know. Misery loves company. You know, it's an affliction.
And I'm like, Jess, that's what dining rooms are for, right? No one uses those.
right.
Just put plants in there.
Asylums are full of people that get along with each other.
Was Ron coming today?
I hope so.
Well, I'm gonna snitch on Chris Bryant. I'm late because Chris was just here at my house. And he's like, well, I can probably do it on the phone. I said, you're in trouble. You need to be on Zoom. So I don't know if he'll get on or not.
I am here. I'm
Ah, there he
here.
is.
This is about to make the drive from Yoder's awesome and easy.
Well, don't fall off the road or anything.
No, I'm gonna put you. I've got you playing in the car, so it's like listening to a podcast.
That's cool.
Only worse.
I'm looking for the asylum.
He can't wreck. I just gave him a tuber and he has to take care of it.
Which one
Okay,
did you?
Quinn a tuber. Quinn's got to take care of this.
Quinn wanted the irony. Remember, you took that Caitlin's Joy I gave you, Jess.
Yeah.
That he wanted, and I said, "Well, you're gonna have to talk to Jess." But I just gave him another one, so
Oh,
all for Quinn.
yeah. No,
Quinn-
I have it.
Quinn saw it at the Petiti show when I brought her later that weekend, and she's like, "Dad, this is the prettiest flower here." And I was like, "All right, I know who grew that. It's Tammy May."
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. I'm taking cuttings of it right now because I would like to have like 3 or 4 of them. So
There you go. All right, I'm putting you guys on mute and turning off my video so I'm not tempted to watch you, but I can
Okay.
hear you all.
all right. I still don't see Ron.
He was having some condo problems, like he said.
I wonder, you know what? He didn't ask me to send a reminder, so I wonder if he forgot. I can give him a call.
Yeah, it's not like him.
Yeah, do you want to start, Tony, and I can give him a call?
Yeah, I think I can start. What time is it?
7:02.
7:02. Well, I'll click up here. Okay. We're going to start with show judging today. And I'll run through these. This is probably the most important module of the 3 we're going to do today. The other 2, the CHD one it's pretty self-explanatory. And the trial gardens, you'll get a chance to do that. We like to do that kind of thing where we do more seedling bench, but the trial gardens are something that you probably won't get as much experience until a little later in your Dahlia judge career. So this is really the key here, this module here, because this is what you're going to be doing from day one, and probably a lot of it, because Dahlia Society of Ohio is really fortunate that we put on so many shows. A lot of clubs just have one show, but we're fortunate enough to put on 2 fairs, and the Petitis, the members only show. And then we have, of course, our big show at Parma. So we have 4 of them. So you get ample opportunities to judge. Now there's 2 methods of judging. And let's see. The first is judging against perfection. And this is what we use in the trial garden or on the seedling bench. And that's why they usually insist that we have a majority of senior judges to do this, is because you have to know what perfection is. And it takes a while to really understand what a good dahlia is and what perfection is. So when you're judging at those, you have this idea in your mind of what the best dahlia that you could possibly imagine is, and then you're judging every other dahlia on the seedling bench or in the trial garden against that ideal standard. And of course, the ideal standard is a 100-point dahlia. But when we judge at shows, you don't really judge against perfection. We judge against other competition, which makes it a lot easier. It was kind of interesting to me that when I was in New Zealand and Australia, they actually score every dahlia and give it a point total. And then whoever has the highest point wins that class. And that's how they do it. So they actually judge each bloom against perfection in their shows, but we don't do that. And I really, after doing both, I really like our system much better. I think it's a lot faster because the way we judge is a lot of times, and I think most of us would agree that, you know, we eliminate the weaker dahlias first rather easily, the blooms that just aren't up to snuff, and then whittle it down to the ones that are worthy of competing against one another. Okay, so judging is judging against the competition. The characteristics of one bloom are compared then against the others. And the judging team will rank all of the entries by evaluating their attributes and faults of each. The process is repeated for every bloom in the class. Generally, what we do is when you get to a show, the first thing you do as a judge is to make sure that the exhibitors and the show chairman have put all the blooms in the right classes. So part of your responsibility is to go through your table, say if you're judging all the Bs, and make sure that the classes are in order and that the blooms are put where they're supposed to be. Because there's a rule in most of the shows that if you've already judged the class and you find one that's been put in the wrong place, you don't go back and rejudge the class. It's the exhibitor's fault for having put it in the wrong space. But sometimes that gets a little unfair because these blooms really get moved around a lot. Exhibitor puts them on the table. The show chairman will come along and find out which classes are particularly heavy. So he'll move the table around to accommodate one. And then when the judges come along, they move things around too to make sure everything's in the right order. So I think the key here is to try to be a little lenient in that respect, but also take your time to go through that table and make sure that everything's where it's supposed to be. You know, you'll start with the white formal decoratives and go through the color classes, and then you get through the IDs and go through those color classes, and then the semi-cactuses, the cactuses, the incurves, and then the lineated ones. So that's pretty important. And that's one of the main things as a judge. You don't want to get to a class and go, oh, look, we missed this. You know, this is out of place and nobody caught it. So it's good for every judge to do that, not just, you know, give the responsibility all to one on the team. Everybody should kind of run through it and make sure that things are where they're supposed to be. This is important too. Before you do that with each individual table, before the head judge actually assigns the judging teams, and usually what happens when you get to a show, you sign in and there's a list of judges or people who want to judge and who are going to clerk. And then the judging chair will assign teams, usually with 3 or more on a team. And that's what you don't know what you're going to be judging. Usually, sometimes at the big shows, they'll have the assignments done early for time purposes. But in the vast majority of shows, local shows especially, you don't know what you're going to judge until you get there minutes before. But before you do that, you should get there a little bit early, walk through all the rows, and get an idea of what the quality is. You know, some shows are better than others depending on the weather conditions in the area and the amount of rain you had, or if there was a tornado that came through the night before, a lot of people's dahlias look pretty ragged, you know, that kind of thing. So you go through a show looking just to get an idea of what the overall quality is. And that's what they're trying to tell you in this. During the judges should check for the correct name on the entry tags to make sure that they're classified right. And sometimes people get mixed up, especially you know, newer growers. And again, you know, you try to be lenient and you try to help them out a little bit. If you see something that's obviously in the wrong place, you know, we reclassify those. It's just common sense. I'm gonna move this out of the way. Because I can see all of you now. It's pretty cool. But I can't, Ron, are you there now?
I am, sorry
I thought I heard you laughing at me there.
sorry to join late.
No, that's okay. Judges should, I can't really, how do I get rid of this, everybody that's on here? Can I get rid of that, Jess? I can't see my whole screen is the problem.
Yes. So on the top right, in
Okay.
Zoom, there should be something that says view. Usually for me, it's like right by their pictures.
No, I didn't see that. That's okay though. I can deal with it. Okay, I think judges should initially look at the entries from at least arm's length away. I can't read all the writing, that's the problem. But I think I spoke about this a little bit last time when I was going through old bulletins, and there was an article by Wayne Shantz, who was really a really good guy, and he was real big in the Dahlia Society a while, and I remarked that I had had the privilege of judging with him at one of the national shows, and I can tell you that the first thing we did, both of us, is we got back as far as we possibly could. And I think the reason, and when we wrote the guide, the reason we say at least arm's length is because a lot of the shows, the tables are close together and you can't get much further away than that. When you get them whittled down and you can use a judging table and get further away, the further away you are and where you start, the better off you are. So if you can get back 6-8 feet, I think that helps. If you can't, it's just not practical, then you have to just kind of step back as far as you can. And the reason for that is because your balance and proportion are so much easier to evaluate from a distance when you can actually see these dahlias from far away. You can actually see how the proportion and the balance goes together. That's why I really like when you're, again, we talked about when you're show judging, you're judging one bloom against the other. And if it gets really close, sometimes the best way to differentiate between two really close blooms, or when you're judging for like best bee of the show or best of the show, we're usually on they're already on a black background and you can get far back, but you should try to get back as far as you possibly can. And part of the reason I think that's so important, if you can see a fault from 6 or 8 feet away, it's more significant that one that only becomes apparent when you're at arm's length or when you are like a foot away. And that's especially true, I think, with color, because a lot of the blooms that we really like and are quite popular, they have a little bit of streaking and dotting if you look really close. I mean, if you get up really close to them, you can see a bit of streaking. but you're not going to fault that too much, or as much, I should say. You're going to fault it, but you're not going to fault it as severely if you can't see it unless you get right up, get your nose in it, you know. Now, if you can see the streaking and that kind of thing from 6 or 8 feet away, it's a much more severe fault. But that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. That you want to get your severe faults and note those as a team from a distance, and then get up closer. And then you get less severe faults. Okay, yeah, here it is. The severity of the faults increases with the distance from which it was apparent. That's sentence is kind of familiar to me since I wrote it. Faults on the face are penalized much more severely than the ones on the sides and back. And again, that's definitely true. And here's a good example on this bloom here. I mean, this is a face fault, which any faults that are on the face, if you see this fault on the face of the bloom, you have to fault it more severely than if this was on the back of the bloom. If you have to turn the bloom around to see that it's more severe than if it's more severe on the face than it would be on the back. And that's what I was saying too about the color faults like that. And that's really worth just taking a minute and getting that into your head. You know, that this is one of the most important concepts that we talk about tonight. So the further away you can see something that's wrong, the worse it is. And if it's on the face, if it's on the front, then it's worse than if it's on the sides or the back. And this is what I was talking about with the color. You can see this bloom. You can see it has color issues. You know, the insert in the middle there, you can see that it has color issues from quite a ways away. Judges should examine the entry from all angles. Both sides should be evaluated, as well as the back, underside of each bloom. And I think another key concept out of this whole thing tonight should be that you cannot judge fairly without having a process. And that process has to be where you start from far away, you look at the balance and proportion, and then you look at the face of that bloom and you start walking up to it, and you see more faults will become apparent as you get closer. And then you have to, so where do you go from there? What's the next thing you do? You have to examine these blooms from every single angle. And that means usually at our shows, especially the big guys, your next step should be to put these guys on the floor so that you can see the centers and the tops of the bloom. We show 2 sets of leaves very commonly, and a lot of those blooms, for especially people who aren't 6'8", you're not going to be able to see the centers, and you're not going to be able to see the top of the bloom as well. So you're often have to put the bigger blooms, your AA's, A's, and a lot of your B's on the floor to evaluate them. But what I'm saying is we've looked at them from a distance, we've looked at the face, we've walked up, now we've got to evaluate the top of the bloom. And when you evaluate the top of the bloom, you always, I think most of us like to look and go from center out. You evaluate that center, you talk about the center, because the center of the bloom will give you an indication of how mature or immature it is. So you start with the center and then go out, and then you can also, everybody should take their turn standing over the top of it and looking for the contour, form faults that are in it, the center, and color imperfections. Then you put the bloom back up or on the floor, and then you have to examine both sides. So you have to turn it to the left and look at the left side. Then you turn it to the right and you look at the right side. And usually most of us like to say, like to evaluate each bloom that's in contention after each view. So you would start with your 6 or 8 foot view, and you'd all talk and you'd say, which one of these guys has the best balance and proportion? And you'll have a discussion and you might say, well, this one's this is, well, I think it's a wash. I think they're about equal. And that's fine. A lot of times, the faults kind of balance out, or the proportion balances out. Then when you get up closer, you talk about what you see up close. Then when you get over the top, you kind of rate the tops. You talk about which one has a better center, which one is got better contour, better shape, better symmetry from the top. And then when you turn them to the side, you say, is any one of these have a better side view? This is when you evaluate the depths, and your depth parameters. For most of the dahlias, it's 3/4 for your fully doubles anyway. But when you're looking at singles too, you're evaluating that flat plane and the bloom angle from the side. You can get a good idea. And then you talk about, does one have which one stands out from the side? Turn it to the other side, look at that. And then then the last thing that I like to do is turn them around and you evaluate the backs. Who's got the best backs? Who's reflexing all the way where the petals are touching? Does the form hold all the way to the back? Or does it start to get messy back there?
If I may, let me just
ahead.
add, I think that the discussion process is something that you don't necessarily find in all clubs, but that's certainly something that we feel strongly through that process. It makes good sense to make observations and, say, did you notice this as you are going through this examination process? Thanks.
Great point, Ron. Really, really great point. There should be so much chatter when you're judging with the team. Everybody should be talking. It should be just, by the time you're done, you should really know each other pretty well and have a lot of respect for each other's opinions. This slide right here, though, I think really is something that's important. And I think that a lot of time, of all the things when we judge, a lot of times people won't look underneath these blooms, especially these big ones, to see, you wouldn't believe how many times you'll see a piece of cotton stuck up there. I don't really usually fault that too much, but you should, as a judge, at least know it's there, not like get surprised when you move it and it falls out. So, you have to judge them from every single angle. And the only way you're going to do that is if the team develops, the team leader will set the tone, and he'll say, all right, let's look at the front, let's look at the top, let's look at the left side, right side, back, and underneath. And then you've looked at every single aspect of the bloom. And then you should also, have the discussion when you're back and going close with the foliage. Foliage is generally evaluated more from the distance for balance and proportion, and then from the front. Okay. I'm taking a little more time on this module because I really do think this is the most important module. This is what you're going to be doing.
This is where our crew will be spending the most time, that's for sure.
That's for sure. And this is really an important thing. If you do enough chattering and enough talking, and you put these things in an order, if an exhibitor comes up to you and said, I don't, and a lot of times, and I would say 90% of the times, it's an honest question. They'll come up and say, I'm just curious, why did you pick this one over this one? I kind of thought that was a better bloom. And then you can actually recreate the conversation that you had as a team as to why that one was put over. And I would say 99 out of 100 times, the person that asked the question is going to go, oh, yeah, well, I didn't see that. I didn't look at the back. I didn't notice that. It's because we're judges and we took a lot of time talking about it, and we really gave them a good look from all angles, whereas somebody that casually didn't judge the bloom and just came up and said, boy, I really like that one. Why didn't it win? you'll be able to tell them because you can recreate it. And then if it did have to go to a vote, which doesn't happen that often, you know, if it was a 2-to-1 vote, you don't say, well, I disagreed with the majority. And, you know, you just say, this is what the team thought and this is why, and you leave it at that. So you don't open the door to people being upset because they know who judged it, if that makes sense. Judges rely on their knowledge of the evaluation characteristics and their weighted values to assess entries. And this is why they call it judging. You know, it's judging because you have to weight the severity of the faults and which ones are the worst. And again, you can always go back to that. Boy, if I saw that fault from 6 feet, that's a more severe fault than one that the bug hole that I saw in the back of the plant, or the little bit of a problem with the pedals being, say, on an FD being a little disheveled in the back. So it is a judgment thing. We're not using a scorecard when you're judging these at our shows. Just compare the attributes rather than point scoring them. And if you talk about it, you'll come to a consensus vast majority of the time.
I think, Tony, as an expansion on that a bit, I feel like the relationship to the scorecard is that you need to kind of keep in the back of your mind that a form fault or a color fault is something that you want to emphasize a bit more than a stem fault, for example. And that, you know, that's providing a perspective to your show judging as well as important in Seeley judging.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. But you do have to make sure that you evaluate all the characteristics. You know, if the foliage is really bad, I mean, you know, foliage is only 10 points, but if it's really bad, that doesn't mean that you give it an 8 or an 8.5. It can get a 0. You can just, I mean, in your mind, you can say that is so bad, I can't live with that, you know. So,
like if it had virus on it, for example.
Well, exactly. I mean, you could actually almost disqualify it. And then show may contain categories with single blooms as well as multiples, triples, fives, baskets. Always have to read your show schedule. Always. Yeah, this is we've talked about that pretty much. Classified cultivars placed according to the CHD. I can't really read that. Oversized or undersized dahlias should be eliminated from competition. Or is this a test?
No.
I can't see the right side of my screen because
I think there's a not at the end of that line.
Oh, okay.
Oversized or undersized should not be eliminated.
Yeah. We don't really, you don't penalize for that. But I have to say in defense that, you know, most shows, I mean, diminutiveness in the smaller ones is rewarded from the miniatures on down. So if you had 2 blooms that were really, really equal, and one miniature was 5.5 inches and the other one was 3.5, you know, you should reward the little guy because it's a miniature dahlia and it's supposed to be grown. You know, it's grown as a miniature. And I'll never forget the time I was judging giants at the national show, and John Thierman was still alive, you know, from Wisconsin, and he was just he was a big, huge man, but he was a giant too in the field, and he wasn't judging because his legs were kind of bad, and he was sitting over there on the side, and we were discussing all this, and the blooms were really close. There were 2 really, really good giants there, and we were talking and going, and then all of a sudden, out of the corner of the room, I hear somebody say, which one looks like a giant? I'll never forget that. And we looked at each other and we went, yeah, that's right. Give it to the big guy. It's supposed to be a giant, and it's 12 inches and the other guy was a little undersized. So, I mean, when it gets that close that you've been talking about it for 5 minutes, I think John just got a little tired of hearing it. And he just said, well, which one looks like a giant, So, I mean, keep that in the back of your mind too. But that's one of the last criteria, we really don't penalize oversized or undersized, but there is a kind of reward when the big ones get big and the little ones stay little, if that makes sense. And especially today with the micros, I think that's going to be even more important, I think we really, right now, we're supposed to be lenient, and if they're over 2 inches, you say okay, because we're just now getting the hybridizing to do those. But basically, that would be, I think, even more important with our micros to, reward the ones that are grown smaller.
I agree with
Judges
that.
must judge an entry according to the CSD classification. And that's important too. And they don't always grow like it's in that book. And it's just the way it is. It'll grow different in your garden depending on the weather, and then they grow different in different parts of the country. Here's a bloom here. I think I know. I remember when I see this bloom here. This exhibit of AC Train, two-tone blend, listed as which is a variegated dahlia. The definition of variegated is 2 or more distinct colors on the face or reverse of the florets, dots, splashes, stripes, narrow lines, which contrast with the basic colors. I hate to even show this, but this is the way it's supposed to look on the right, and this is the way it, you can see on the left where it's not really a variegated. But I'll tell you, I have a hard time, a really hard time. The bloom on the right, look at the form of this thing. You see the form faults here, guys? I mean, look at these petals and look at the center on this thing. The center is actually, this may blow before they judge for best of show. I mean, this guy's got hours left. He's about ready to go. And these things here are just terrible. Look at this one here. I mean, this one has pretty uniform form and color, a beautiful center. This one has the proper 45-degree angle. And this is a perfect example, I think, of what's going on now. And I think a lot of you younger judges, as you become more proficient in your careers, I think you're going to be forced to address this as classified thing. You buy this tuber and it's a variegated, and it grows like this in your yard. You bring it to a show and they pick this because yours doesn't have enough flecks and stripes. That's the way the rules read now. I can honestly say that I would have a hell of a hard time picking this bloom on the right over this bloom, because this bloom to me is quite unattractive and has a lot more form faults.
But you're saying that's true even if it is a variegated class, huh, Tony?
Well, I mean, I think I was a little disappointed with that they made such a big deal. This is obvious here that this is classified as a BBID orange. I think this is probably a case where the stock is mutated or somebody brought in, was sold a tuber that was something else. I mean, this is obviously not going to win anything anyway. I mean, look at this has a green center over here, and the form is all over the place, guys. I mean, you're never going to pick this dahlia for anything, but I think that's what happened there. And they give you the definition of an informal decorative. This is just completely misclassified by whoever entered it. cultivars do not win because they do not reflect their classifying, often end up on the reclassification list. And this is really what's supposed to happen when you grow something that in an area that just doesn't grow the way it's in the book. I don't want to get into too much about that at this point. Here's staging. Who's that guy on the left? He doesn't look like he knows what the hell he's doing.
That guy is a pro. I can assure
I don't know
everybody of
about
that.
Staging refers to the act of the exhibitor placing the bloom in a vase and properly labeling it as to show off its greatest assets for the judges. I agree with that. I think that's what we're trying to do. You know, what you're trying to do is make it look as pretty as possible, you know. Exhibitors must decide how much stock and foliage to include the best. And when you're doing this, that's why, you know, when I go back over here and I'm staging, when I put these blooms in like this, I'll leave this like this to look at it. But, you know, the chances are that, you know, I may cut this down because I don't like the proportion of it. But I put them in vases like this, and then I step back 6 to 8 feet and decide, you know, I'll have Jackie put her hands over here or put a piece of paper and decide whether I want to see one set or 2 sets. And then I'll get the piece of paper and I'll have her walk back. And I said, you like it better with 1 or 2? Where do you think the balance is better? So this is just a little bit for you guys on staging. Stage them up, you know, cut them long, bring them to the show, stick them in vases, and then evaluate them. You notice I like to get a nice white wall behind mine so I can see real well. I don't like busyness behind because it distracts me. And then cut them down at the show and decide what the proportion should be. How much stock and how much full, and again, that's just a judgment call. Judges should, I don't think you award superior staging. I look at staging as a way to accentuate the positives and try to minimize the negatives on your blooms, you know. And if you do that, you know, you're not going to get faulted as severely. Yeah, it's not an evaluation, can maximize the beauty. That's certainly true. Chair holds a judging show where you are given the following judging team. And we talked about this already about how you're going to what you're going to judge. And just to recap, you go through that section, you go through that table and make sure everything's in order. Make sure all the numbers are ascending. Okay. Typical composition. Senior judge, credited judge, candidate judge. And this varies, you know, a lot depending on, you know, I've had judging teams where there have been 2 senior judges, 2 accredited judge, a candidate judge, 2 clerks, you know, so there's 7 of us making decisions. And that's fine. The more the merrier. And then when you reach a consensus, unanimous consensus with 7 people, you know, I think you've really accomplished something. Clerk, get their opinions too. They have eyes and ears, and they can see things. Portion of the show, which is determined by the judging chair. Okay. Yeah, and this is courtesy. You know, everybody's tired. Most of us have stayed up late into the night staging our own blooms. Then you get up early in the morning, you know, and have coffee and eat a donut, and then you walk around and you judge the quality of the show. You see, you know, how good it is. And then you judge your section and you're so tired, but it's a big show and there's not many judges. You have to drag yourself over to the judging chair and say, we're done. Do you need anything else? And they'll give you a big hug and give you another clipboard and say, yeah, go judge this section too. And so the object is to work as a team of judges and get the whole show judged. So everybody's got to pitch in and judge till you drop. So
particularly true, I think, Tony, when teams are set up in advance and it isn't really clear what the balance of the distribution of the sections are going to be. So you really do need to, you're going to find situations there where there is a big disproportionate assignment of the team. So really important to go back and ask.
Right. Each show has their unique process they follow, how winning blooms ultimately take their final spotlight at the head table. And again, you have to, as an exhibitor, you should read the thing too to see how you want to place your blooms and that, but you always have to read that show schedule. As a judge and as an exhibitor, you got to know what you're walking into. Extremely important, and it's a responsibility as a judge. Judges must respect variances of opinion and democratic rule. That's really true. I mean, again, it's judging, and everybody sees things a little bit differently. Usually, with discussion, you can reach a majority rule. If you have to vote, you vote in majority rules. Okay. Any questions on that one? I'm going to keep going. If you have any other questions, though, let me know. Anybody
Tony,
have any questions?
I do.
Right?
I have a question. It's Carol Palmer.
Hi, Carol. Go ahead.
Muted.
Could you please explain what's meant by the term depth?
Yeah, it's how deep the bloom is to its diameter, you know. So for most of our, like your double A's, B's, 3/4 is it. Now, when you get into incurved cactuses, it has to be at least half the diameter, the depth of the bloom. And like I said, when you turn that thing to the side, you'll be able to see how deep it is. And actually, and this has come up, I was kind of surprised. I've heard this argument sometimes, even with senior judges. A bloom can be too deep. It's not supposed to be deeper than it is wide. In other words, when you say the diameter is 10 inches, the depth should not be 12 inches. The ideal depth would be about 3/4 or, you know, a little bit more. Most judges really like to see them deep and reflexed all the way to the stem, you know, but a lot of times that's the genetics. Okay.
Thanks.
Do you understand that, Carol? Did that make sense?
It seems to me that what you're saying is that the depth is the measurement from, say, looking at the face of the bloom down through at a side view to the extreme back of the bloom.
Right.
Correct?
Right.
Okay.
And
Okay.
you know how when they judge, you know how they judge like a lot of the biggest blooms in the show, they'll take the diameter with a set of calipers and then they'll measure it from the side with a set of calipers and they'll multiply those two numbers for the biggest bloom. Well, the number you get when you multiply the from the face, how wide it is, and then when you turn it to the side, that number, that should be 3/4 or a half or whatever on our fully doubles. Stellars, I think, are a half or more too, aren't they, Ron?
I don't think so. I think they're,
Are they 3/4?
I think they're
2/3?
3/4.
I can't remember. I don't grow any stellars, but I mean, yeah. You have to, again, before you start your judging, man, when you're judging, read your style guidelines for everything. I always have to do that when I'm judging the open-centered stuff. And I've been doing this for a long time. Trial garden judging. So you probably know there's I think there's 8 trial gardens now in the United States. And that's why, depending on our area, we used to have one at Mahoning Valley, and I used to be able to go down there and help judge those. But otherwise, you have to I think our closest garden may be Elkhart, which
Yeah.
is, for me, is about 4 or 5 hours. And so that's why sometimes it's hard to get a chance to do this. But what you're doing is exhibitors from all over the country submit 3 tubers or 3 plants to these trial gardens, and then they grow them. They pinch them and they grow them to the number of laterals that you tell them that the plant is supposed to be. So if I send a AA bloom to a trial garden, they're going to grow it 3 or 4 up. They're going to prune it to 3 or 4 laterals, and they're going to judge those 3 plants or 3 tubers that I grew. And this is a beautiful trial garden. I don't know which one it is, but it's gorgeous. And this is what you
That's
would
Tacoma.
do. Which is it, Tacoma?
Yeah,
And that's you would actually go around and you would like judge this. This is a 3. You would judge these, and then any other ones that were ready, you would judge these. So this is what we're talking about when we say trial garden judging. But there's only, I think there's 7 in the States and 1 in Canada. Okay, they're going to tell us where they're located, the purpose, recommendations, and the basics of the ADS scorecard. Okay, there's one in Tacoma, Canby, Inland and Spokane. This is the one over here that's in Canada. We got the Midwest and Elkhart, Mid-Atlantic, and then over there at the Eastern. Just to give you an idea. You can see large parts of the country don't have any. They used to have one, Buddy Dean, I think, used to run one in the Carolinas. Doesn't do. They're a lot of work. They're a lot of work for the local society because you've got to be on top of it. Somebody's got to be going out there at least a couple times a week. Mahoning Valley had one and they took it really seriously, and they did a tremendous job. They had it there at Mill Creek Park, and it was beautiful. But it's a lot of work for the society. Those judges have to just be so committed, and sometimes they don't live that close. And not only the judging, but somebody has to, disbud those, deadhead, weed, make sure they're getting water and fertilizer at the right time. These trial garden directors and the ones that do a good job, they're to be commended. Okay, it promotes, and this is how we introduce them. So we talked about when you judge at a show, you judge against the competition. When you judge in a trial garden, you're judging against perfection. Rules and criteria have been established so that they're the same. You can see that most of them are grown out in the open. There's no shade. That's why a lot of time a variety that is really pretty good in the trial garden doesn't do as well for a lot of exhibitors, since most exhibitors have gardens where they provide a little bit of shade. So sometimes there's a discrepancy about how something will do for your exhibitors and how well it scores. And that's one of the reasons I feel is because of the amount of shade. There's no shade cloth or anything like that. And you can see at this particular garden, there's not even a tree line. This thing is getting a lot of sun all day. Plants might not exhibit this in different regions of the country. For that reason, the hybridates enter cultivars in several regions. And that's definitely true. They grow different, and same cultivar grows different in different areas. Walter Hardesty was the best dahlia we ever had in the eastern part of the country, and they could not grow it at all out on the other side on the coast. And then they have some out there that just don't do well out here for us. It's just the way it is. It's kind of like horses for courses, if you're an old horse bettor. More pictures of trial gardens. Like I said, three tubers or 3 plants. And it's completely blind. They just have numbers. There's nothing else. So nobody knows who the hybridizer is, who sent it in, nothing like that. So there's no bias. That's the whole goal. At least 3 judges, the majority being seniors, score each entry. And that looks like Terry Schroeder out there.
Yep.
Yeah, and he's judging that one. Avoid scoring cultivars. And it's never a good idea to score during the hottest part of the day. But you know, when you've got you got judges that are working and you got judges that have to drive a distance to get there, sometimes you're judging in conditions that aren't ideal just because of limitations. So you have to adjust your scoring accordingly. Pretty hard. Sometimes substance in the heat of the day is, you have to be a little forgiving, for instance. And then you observe everything there is about the plant. And again, you consider the weather conditions. Pairing the number of blooms. And again, this goes back to the way they culturally take care of them. They try hard to grow them like, you know, most of us grow them, where you let more laterals come on for the smaller ones and fewer for the big ones, so they can give you a good representation. And then there's a faulty characteristic that lacks consistency. I mean, if you're growing a variety and every plant looks different, that's not good. And they require at least 2 of the 2 plants have to make it in order for them to judge it. They won't judge just one clump. This is important whether you judge at the trial garden or on the seedling bench. You have to get your color in the shade with natural light. And one thing you probably will be doing is you'll probably get the pleasure of judging some seedlings, and you can't use that color chart that we have inside. You have to try to get those dahlias out near a window, or even take them outside if you want an accurate color. Because a lot of us that are old enough to remember when used to have to adjust for incandescent light and fluorescent lights and the temperature of the fluorescent light, because you would get blue or yellow shading. Well, the lights inside are still doing that to the colors on these blooms. So you have to get color outside, and it should be in the shade. Potential giving consideration to the level of care as compared to your own garden. To me, this is a lot of just a lot of common sense. I mean, obviously they can't control insects completely. This isn't like if you see a bunch of beetle damage on the face of a plant when you're on the show table. If it's in a trial garden and a beetle got in there and chewed it up, you have to be able to say, well, how would this look without the beetle holes? You know, that's not the person who submitted the variety. It's not their fault.
They're not allowed to spray in the trial gardens, are they? For bugs?
Yeah, they spray. They do what they have to control things.
Oh, are they allowed to?
Yeah, they do. And
Yes.
you know, that's why they're saying spray deposits and powdery mildew. Now, one thing they will fault, I can tell you, is if they have a variety, say the whole garden doesn't have powdery mildew, and then they've got a few plants here, a susceptibility to disease like that, especially like powdery mildew. I don't know if it's more of a, you know, you have to fault that a little bit if it's prone to it. Sometimes that can be due to the wind pattern as it comes through the garden too. So again, you have to use a little bit of common sense.
That's one of those things that you probably rely on the perspective of the trial garden chair to say, yeah, you know, we're having trouble with powdery mildew. Try to, you know, ignore that because they understand their conditions better than you can.
For sure. But sometimes I know in my own garden, there's certain varieties that are just prone to powdery mildew.
Yeah, That's
And
true.
genetically, some are just more susceptible, and they'll see that, and sometimes you'll get that a note, had a lot of powdery mildew, and it is a genetic predisposition for some of our varieties. And then poor late disc budding, again, you have to, these are just volunteers. These aren't professional people getting $50 an hour to be out here doing this, and they get sick too, and they have problems in their family, and somebody that's supposed to be doing it can't get out there. So sometimes things just don't go perfect, and you have to, as a judge, you have to just take that into consideration. You have to be able to kind of look through a lot of this stuff that's weather and related. Yeah, and I mean, if somebody didn't put enough ties on, for instance, and you had a windy day, and the plant got knocked down, or at a 45, the stems, the plants, we've all had that happen in our own gardens. Now all of a sudden, those stems were all crooked because the plant went down to 45 degrees or worse, and then the angles are wrong. Where you don't fault, you have to kind of look at that thing and say, well, I know why that stem's crooked. It's because the plant fell over. That makes sense. Soft substance if judged midday. Yeah, we talked a little bit about that. Minor fading on mature blooms located in full sun all day. Most of your reds and your darks are gonna fade somewhat. It's a real plus if you got some that don't fade much. Mechanical, yeah, I mean, if people walk by and snap a bloom off, I mean, not much you could do about that. Two methods of judging against perfection. And this is what we use in the trial gardens and seedling bench. And again, that's why a lot of times they want senior judges who have a really good idea, who have seen, the best dahlias there are, and they know what grand champions look like and what sectional champions look like and what just blue ribbon winners look like. So they can kind of, in their mind's eye, they can say, well, this will get a blue ribbon, but this is never going to get out of section. Or this will get out of section. I could see this bloom grown well could actually win best of show. That's the kind of things that you have to know, or you don't have to know it, but you'll develop that appreciation with time and with a lot of judging. And then we talked about when you're in the show bench, we judge one against the other. We don't judge against perfection. Trial gardens, blooms are judged. This is pretty much what we were saying. Points are awarded based on the scorecard evaluation. Form, color, substance, stem, foliage, and bloom position. Form 30, color 20, substance, stem, foliage, bloom position are all 10. So we made it real easy. 30, 20, 10, 10, 10, 10, okay? With the uniformity, that adds up to 100. Floriferousness is judged in the trial garden. So when you look at those three plants, you just say, boy, this thing's a really strong grower, and look at all those blooms. And as soon as you deadhead one, you got another one coming. And then, of course, the uniformity of the blooms too. You don't want one bloom being a lot different than the other blooms, especially with your bicolors and your variegated and those. Methods used in trial gardens. Yeah, these are the ones where you're using the scorecard, where you're judging against perfection. Perfection being 100 points, where everything scores maximum. That's 100. To pass in a trial garden, you got to get 85. And that's why a lot of times it's, I think, so difficult, especially for young judges, to realize that I was looking through old dahlia bulletins, and when Edna C got introduced, there was a trial garden that it scored an 85 in. I mean, it depends on how they grow and where and how they did in that year, but passing score is 85. probably the highest you're gonna see Dahlia scored against perfection. And then Ron, you can speak to this because you were trial garden chair for years. You know, when you're talking 93, 94, that's probably the ceiling for most of the stuff that's scored. And then the floor is usually 80, 75. Do I have that right, Ron?
Yeah, I'd say that was, I don't think I ever saw a 94, Tony. But
Yeah,
I
I've
have
seen
seen,
93s, I think, but I mean, those are
Yep.
usually usually they're not really 93s. They're just judges were feeling pretty good that day. But so to
and
give you an idea, you're talking about a range for ones that score and don't score of oftentimes 10, maximum 15 points. So you're really kind of splitting a lot of hairs here. And they're judged against perfections. And then
Could you say
complete the
something
score. Go ahead.
Could you say something about how they must average all the scores they get during the season, or like at one trial garden, if they get judged more than once?
Go ahead, Ron.
they get judged a minimum of 3 times in order to qualify to be scored. If it doesn't get that, the trial garden director has to work like crazy to get, you know, another score or 2 out there.
And then you
But,
average them.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the place that has to do that virtually every year is Tacoma, because they end up with, you know, often 8 or 10 or 15 scores. And other trial gardens, Easterns used to be, this is, you know, I've been out of that for 5 or 6 years, but Eastern used to struggle to get, they had to work to get their 3 scores, but they are averaged, is correct.
Thank you.
And the next step is the harder one, and that is to rationalize the difference in the classifications between different trial gardens, because almost inevitably you have a mix of classifications, one trial garden to the next. So it gets harder from there.
And there are 2 different scorecards, of course, open center and fully double. So you got to have the scorecard for which one you're doing. There's the fully double, there's the open center. Nice picture of a different trial garden and judges out there doing their thing. Team 2,
I think that's Spokane,
Spokane.
I think.
And see, this is what you have to do. You put the date, the time, the location of the trial garden. Or if you're doing seedling bench, you put the show you're at, the number of plants. In a seedling bench, you're doing 3. In the trial garden, you know, it's either like Ron said, you need 2 to score. So you're gonna be doing 2 or 3. And then you have to classify that cultivar. And this is where it gets crazy. I've sent them in, and you know, the classifications, I sent to 6 trial gardens, and you know, you get 2 or 3 classifications, or you know, 2 classifications where 3 of them say it's one and you know, an ID, and the other ones say it's a semi-cactus. And I don't doubt the judges, it just grew different in different areas with different conditions.
Hey, I have a question before we.
Sure, go ahead.
So are scorecards only used in trial gardens? Because I don't remember having them pulled out at like the national show or anything.
No, only in trial gardens and on the seedling bench, because we're judging, and our shows, we're judging against competition. That's one of the 2 methods of judging. But in the trial gardens and on the seedling bench, we're judging against perfection. And that's when you pull out the scorecard so you can tally up those attributes. But on the show bench, you won't be using a scorecard. But like Ron said, he made a really good point, is you have to know, you know, form is worth 30, color is worth 20. So you have to kind of know where your emphasis has to go when you're judging one against the other.
And I think
Tony, I
sometimes
have a question for you.
Sure, go ahead.
when you're submitting a dahlia for evaluation, do you or Ron have a preference of trial garden versus seedling bench?
Oh, I'll answer first. I have a preference. I like seedling bench because I like to stage my own dahlias and I like to match them up. So I really load the gun in my favor when I won't put 3 up unless they're to my standards. So I know they're going to score well. Trial gardens, you just don't have that luxury. I mean, it's growing out there in the weather and in the wind, and so I mean, I think for exhibitors to get a better idea, I think you get a little better idea when you look at a seedling bench entry as to what the potential for that for show is compared to the trial garden. But that's just my bias. Ron, I'd like to hear your comments on that.
It is an interesting question because I feel like the best from the point of view of buying new cultivars, I would not depend on seedling bench. I would depend on the trial garden results because I think that's more generally representative of the potential of a cultivar. From the point of view of exhibition, I'm obviously I'm not the same kind of exhibitor that Tony is, but there are some advantages if you have a very floriferous cultivar to be able to pick 3 and take them to the bench and say these are typical. Well, they're not really typical. They're the 3 best blooms that you have that you might have been able to pick from 10 or 15. So the seedling bench has some tilt in my mind in favor of the exhibitor.
Without a doubt. I've had seedling bench scores on 2 of my introductions that have been in the 90s. And I've never had a trial garden average. I mean, I think that just speaks to Ron's point. Most importantly, don't forget, what's it say up there? Don't forget to learn.
Keep learning.
Keep learning. Okay, I can't that stuff, and have fun. That's probably the most important thing.
Yeah,
and you just got to enjoy this, folks. You got to enjoy it. Okay.
To your point about not using the score sheets when we judge, I think sometimes we refer to the back.
Yeah.
When you're actually judging at a show, the back is a good reminder.
It's a great reminder. Yeah, well said. That's absolutely right.
And Misty, you have a question.
Oh yeah. So across the country at seedling benches, do you have to bring 3 blooms?
You have to have 3 in a vase, in a single vase, Misty.
At shows for undisseminated seedlings?
Yes, for seedling bench, you need to have a triple.
Okay.
It's a triple entry in 1 vase. And that's what we were saying, your staging ability and your ability to pick 3 out of your garden, you pick the 3 best, so I mean, you are stacking the deck a little bit. But then a good exhibitor looks at that and goes, well, if Tony can do it, I can do it too. I know what the potential of that thing is. Trial garden, you just don't know. I mean, but like Ron said, I think in terms of like cut flowers or garden flowers, it probably is advantageous. All right. I'm going to go through this one a little more quickly. I was a little surprised they did a whole personally on this myself. Classification and handbook. I think a lot of this stuff is pretty self-explanatory. And the best thing you can do with this, folks, is just open this thing up and look at it cover to cover, every page, and read it. It's actually, and we refer to it as the CHD, the Classification and Handbook of Dahlias. We print it every year, and it has the most up-to-date information, and that includes on the definitions of our classifications. I did make some suggestions on these modules, and I think the modules were actually changed since I looked at them a little bit. I think they took some of the stuff to heart. Consider the main resource for all Dahlia judges. This is the main research, and we made it pocket sized. It's always been pocket sized, so you could always have it in your pocket. You know, it should be with you. It all shows all the time, because this is where you're going to check the classification. You know, so much information in this thing. It's a must, without a doubt. This is the table of contents. You have to know how to use the research. That's what I said. You got to open it up. You got to get familiar with it. So when you're at a show, you know, you're not fumbling around. You shouldn't even have to read the table of contents, because you got to know what's in it. So get familiar with it. And they're going to highlight some of the useful content. And it has the classification committee, describes the criteria for inclusion, rules. But you just have to read this stuff. And this is critical. It's got the form definitions. And we just changed the definition of form. I made a suggestion to put a phrase in the definition of an informal decorative, and it was accepted by the classification committee. So the definition is different than it was a few years ago. So you got to use the current one of these, because the current form definitions are in there. And they're discussed, and again, it's current, up to date. It's reread, and we talked about this before you judge your class. Reread your definitions, brush up on it. Sometimes it's easy to forget that an incurved cactus only has to be half as deep as it is wide. Color classifications, and it'll refresh your memory too, and all the, you know, the white, yellow, orange, bronzes, and what numbers they are. And then it has a glossary of the terms, because it's so easy to, you know, try to remember revolute, involute, you know, incurved, recurved. So, you know, we're all the same. Those aren't the kind of terms you use every day. So you got to have your book and look at it periodically. I know I do. It explains about how you disseminate a class, you know, like we talked about, through tile gardens or blue ribbons. There's rules for all this. And it has your size classification from 2 to 10, key to the class numbers. And, you know, you're going to be asked to know this, and it's really pretty simple once you look at the little thing they have in there, and you'll get familiar with it. And they've actually come out with a candidate's test that we can use as a learning thing that'll test your knowledge on this, and it'll get you to classify some stuff. And I haven't talked to Ron about it, but I think we could probably utilize that as a learning tool for you guys. And then it has the classification changes, you know, dahlias that were reclassified. I mean, I think the biggest one for us exhibitors in our area of the country was that Wynn's Neon Dream got reclassified. It was probably our best AA, our best giant, got reclassified from an ID to a semi-cactus just recently. You know, for years. And then there's been a lot of that kind of thing happens. A lot of times you're unaware of it if you're don't have your CHD. And they have a nice alphabetical listing. They got abbreviations of the originators, so you can always look up and find out who originated it. And that can be important if they have like best Midwest introduction. You can find out if that one is in the Midwest, because they have a little system of dots and stars and stuff like that to tell you which portion of the country it got introduced in.
That area also lets you identify how successful the cultivar is in the different regions, because they do list the number of higher awards, and it is differentiated by West, East, and Midwest.
Really good point. That's one of the things that I use. I use that a lot just to see how cultivars are doing in different areas of the country. And this is what Ron's talking about. And this is in
Oh,
there.
yeah.
And the best way to do this is just to look at it because it's hard to get this off of a PowerPoint. And then it has the rules for the trial gardens that we talked about, procedures, and then it's got the bench rules and procedures. It's got the reporting guidelines in it. So what you have to do to report, and it's in nice paragraph form. It's not bullet point. So get that out. And then the process for, unclassified dahlias and shows. It's all spelled out in there. There's so much information in that little teeny book that fits in your pocket. Until you really look at it page by page, you just don't realize how much is crammed in there. And then the scorecards are in there. They got, like we talked about, desirable, and they actually have a nice little cheat sheet about desirable and undesirable traits of dahlias for all those different things, so that, before you judge, you may want to just look that over real quick, not just for seedling scorecard, but you could just say, like, what am I looking for? They got cultivars that are retired. And this is a little, what this means is that when a cultivar is submitted for so many different times, the classification committee gets tired of looking at it and they finally say, we ain't looking at this anymore. We're not going to argue if Brookside Snowball is a ball dahlia, or a formal decorative, because we've already talked about it for so many different times. So we can't do that anymore. So they retire some where you cannot submit them for reclassification because they've already been looked at so many times. The year of retirement is noted, classification table. And then one of my real favorite things is the Pacific Northwest supplemental listing. This kind of, I won't say too much more about that, but I think every Dahlia Society in the country, all 60 of us, could have our own 30. Could have our own supplemental listings. This always kind of rankles me a little bit. And then they have a list. This is really good. The Stanley Johnson medal winners, the ones who have won this year after year, gives you a really good idea of the dahlias that are winning consistently.
Hey, Tony, Sharon had a question.
Sure, Sharon, go ahead. Stop me.
I just wanted to make a comment. This is a little bit out of date. Those scorecards are not in the book anymore. They moved them to the website, but you can still get them easily.
Oh, that's a good point, Sharon, because see, this was the 2022 handbook.
Yeah, they moved
In the 23, they had to decide whether to leave the scorecards or the Pacific Northwest supplemental listing, and there was a little bit of a discussion about that. But and we ended up keeping the Pacific Northwest supplemental listing and taking out the scorecards. And then we had the Les Connell winners. That's a relatively new award, and that's for the winningest dahlia, I think, over the last 5 years, which is a real feat. If a dahlia could win the most higher awards for 5 years.
And all those are on the ADS website with pictures.
Yep, all on the ADS website, and then they have the little cheat sheet. And I just I would just like to say too that my own thing on this is that I'm not a big fan of cheat sheets. I mean, I like it for form because 85%, that 25.5 is the form is gonna pass if you give it 25.5 or higher, and color is gonna pass if you give it 17 or higher. But when you get down to this stuff here, substance, okay, 8.5. But when you get to stem, foliage, bloom position, myself, I've given a lot of stems 2s and 3s, and the dahlia still passes. And I've given a lot of foliage 4s and 5s, and it still passes. I think a lot of judges, when they do seedling bench and trial gardens, think that if they don't give that, it's not going to pass if they don't give it 8.5. And what they're really doing is they're shortchanging these and bloom position too. I mean, if the thing is side facing, or it's at 10 degrees, I don't think it should score 8.5. It should probably score 6 or 7. And so you're going to deduct, quite a few points off here, but it's nothing. You can give 4.5 points to give 85 over here, but you'll flunk foliage if you give 8. You only lose 2 points and you flunk it. Well, I'm not afraid to flunk foliage stem. I'll flunk these guys, but it'll still make up for it in color and the other thing, realizing, of course, that stem length can be altered by light, and foliage can be impacted by spraying and stuff like that, and bloom position can be adjusted a lot of time by the grower. So I won't say too much more about that. That's on the inside back cover. And then they talk a little bit about your alphabetical listings and what this is. That's your classification number. There's your size. For the size dahlias, Sharon brought up a good point last time about what are our sized dahlias. Not all dahlias are sized. Right now, there's no size for stellar. I think eventually there will be, because we have Clearview Del Sol, which is, probably 8 inches. And then we have most of our other stellars, which are 5 inches. So eventually I wouldn't be surprised. And then Misty's brought up too, that, if she sees these collarettes and these singles that are up to 5 and 6 inches, and most of us are, they're 3.5. So I think eventually, that's why the CHD is a work in progress. A lot of times sizes will come in later, if that makes sense. A little bit of dahlia philosophy here. Here's your form abbreviations, your color abbreviations, and these are off the color chips. You have to have that book that has the holes in it with the 128 colors. There's all these pinks and all these yellows. So you have to, this is yellow 18 because there's probably 24 yellows and 24 pinks. So what pink is it, what yellow it is.
I have one statement, Terry. It's not really a question. It's I wish they would have done this. Can you go back?
Sure.
Because as being somebody who is newer, I struggled to put these numbers on the tag, like the tag that she put around your bloom.
Sure.
I didn't understand what numbers went on which spot on the tag. So it would have been, I wish I had a tag as an example, but there's the different spots where you have to write in the numbers there. So
like the class and the section?
Yeah. And it's hard to know from this, how to organize them. And each show is different.
It's different. Yeah.
Yeah, it that's really true. Just the always get your number. Don't try to classify it yourself. Get your CHD and look it up. So if you've got Clearview Citron, look it up in your CHD and then use this 3402 as your number all the time. That's the number. Even if it didn't grow up to 30, even if it didn't get up to B size, okay? And then you have to exhibit it like that. But I know what you mean. Like at the Petiti shows, they combine a bunch of those classes, and you've got to use that chart. I would recommend just grabbing a more experienced exhibitor and have them help you out with it. But this is the number that you use most commonly, and you have to get this number out of the CHD because this is the classification number, and it has to be entered as classified.
And if it's not in the CHD, somebody at the show will classify it for you.
It
Right.
has to be classified by the
Senior judge.
classification committee of the show. You have to look in the comprehensive too, though, the one that goes back, to caveman days, because some of them they don't stay in the CHD forever. If they don't get 2 blue ribbons 2 years in a row, they get dropped. But they're still in the comprehensive, the big thick book. So somebody at the show, usually the show chairman or somebody, has to bring a CHD, comprehensive CHD. But the classification chair will have that, and he'll look it up to make sure that it just hasn't dropped out, but you're still growing it.
And I just put the link in the chat if you were interested in getting that composite listing. You can actually buy that. And then, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but the varieties that are in 2022 are just the ones that won last year. Is that, or how long is that time range?
Forever, unless they don't score. If they don't win ribbons 2 years, 2 ribbons 2 years in a row. So it will
won't
be in
the-
there.
Yeah.
Forever until it falls out.
As long as they keep winning, but if they don't win, then they're out.
Well,
Exactly.
they're still in the comprehensive, though. You
Yes.
never go out of the comprehensive. The comprehensive is comprehensive.
And the
Okay.
online guide is the comprehensive.
Is,
So if you
That's
don't want to
right.
buy one, if you use the online guide or the new field online guide, you're basically getting the comprehensive.
See, in order to keep the CHD pocket-sized, if a dahlia isn't winning, which means it's not being shown for 2 years, if it's not getting so many blue ribbons, I think it's 2 a year, it drops out, but it's still in the comprehensive. It always stays in the comprehensive.
Sure. Would it be an advantage to have every show like fill out a sample of their show tags?
Or
I
the
think it could be, sure. Great
Yeah.
idea. Yeah,
yeah.
we
Good
take it
thought,
for
Randy.
granted, never think of it, but sure, Yeah,
I
Randy.
think let me just go back to the comment Tony made a minute ago, and that is that the 4-digit number is the classification number. And whatever show you go to, it will show either class number or classification number. And that's the one that's the 4-digit number that you're seeing there in the second column.
But isn't that excluded? The Petites really is excluded from that.
Is it?
Petiti
I don't remember.
combines numbers, yeah. Petiti's show schedule is a little tough. You have to exhibit there a time or two before you get comfortable with it, I think. But if
Doesn't
you go
it
to
call for-
Petiti's, ask us. We
But
can
you
help you.
still look up the classification number and then see which group it got mushed into.
Exactly. That's how
Yep.
you do it. That's how you do
sounds like a job for our show chair.
it.
Is he on here?
Oh,
Oh, yeah, there he is. And a good hint is if you're going to show, look them up the night before. You probably know the
Yeah.
night before what you're going to take, and then you won't be going nuts at the show.
good point. Jackie and I fill our tags up in the car on the way to the shows because we usually have a drive, and I'll usually remember what I have in the back, or she'll turn around and look, and we'll fill out the show tags so we don't have to do that and get them all wet on the staging table. That's a good tip. And
And
here's
do-
the total awards and that. Okay, I tried to leave a little time for questions. We can talk as long as you want, but we've been taking some questions. So what questions do we have?
Well, I'll start.
Okay.
This is just a question about a little bit about the CHD and sports. Tony, we were talking the other day. Is there a listing of what cultivars were sports, like somewhere saved somewhere?
Boy, I don't know. I've never seen it if there is, Misty. I really haven't. I don't think so.
Doesn't it
I
I
don't
have
just
a
know.
hate
dot
to lose
after
that
it?
data, you know what I mean? That
Yeah.
knowledge.
Doesn't it have a dot after it if it was a sport?
Wow,
I don't know.
maybe,
There's something
I
about a
don't
dot.
know.
Somebody will have to research that, but there's something about a dot, I think, in the name.
Yeah,
When
no,
you look-
I think I've said this before, and I kind of think this is important. If you get a sport, you try to some way, somehow pay homage to the mother plant, because
Yeah.
it's kind of getting an introduction by the back door in the back of somebody, with a genetic mutation. So, like I said, there's always a way to do that, like
Name me a sport.
Jamanda and then marries Jamanda, so, sport of Jamanda was Mary had Jamanda, and Juanita, there was a sport and it was called Nita, so that kind of thing. So you that's kind of just for the younger generation, because long after we're gone, I think that's a really good tradition to realize.
Although there's some, right, like Eggy White. I just saw somebody's post on that. It came from Bryn Terfel.
Yeah, I don't know why they didn't call it Aggie Turfel. I think that would have been a little nicer.
I know Swan Island in their catalog, their dahlias, will tell you what the sport was. A lot of times.
I like that. That's a great idea. Because there's been so many sports of like Spartacus, all the Megoses and all those are just sports, and those are all parentages of
Yeah.
Edna C. Edna of Edna C. You could see the likeness. That was the parent of those. The Spartacus sported a lot of those Megos dahlias, and Harvey Coop.
Harvey Coop.
I think J.S. Butterscotch. I think those are all sports
Yeah.
of Spartacus. But Spartacus originally came from Edna C. and Zorro. There was the seed parent was Edna C. and the pollen parent was Zorro, and that's how they got Spartacus. And then
He mentioned
Spartacus sported all those others. Just a little bit of dahlia history.
I don't see that in the CHD. It may be there, Sharon, but I don't see it.
Question from Carol Palmer.
Sure, Carol.
Can you shed some light on the possible difference between in sizes of dahlias, a mignon and a micro, which both are said to be up to 2 inches in diameter?
That's going to be the next big debate with the nerds that are responsible for classification. And it's probably, I would say, my gut level feeling is it's equally divided. I would like to, instead of us using the term micro, use the term mignon for all the ones
Right across the board.
across the board. But mignon is a little bit, I think it's a really cool old term, but most people are unfamiliar with it. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the mignons, the micros are really mignons, and the mignon single is it's a micro single is what it is, and really a palm is a mignon ball. So there you have it. Once
Ron, there
man gets
are
involved
dots.
in this, the vocabulary gets screwed up.
So what are the dots in the names, I wonder then? I just looked them up and I don't know, there's 202 dahlias with a dot after their name.
Well, that would be real interesting to know.
Find out.
Are
think
they
it's probably in
duplicate?
the CHD, and I probably haven't read it right enough.
Yeah, it's
Well,
probably in there somewhere.
I think
That's
it
kind
is.
of where I just scanned through it and I did not see any reference the sports, but,
But
What
there's
we-
202
I
dahlias
could
with a dot in the name.
send Lou a note. I don't know Karen as well, but Lou would know that answer.
I
My
would-
Embrace
my
has a
Embrace
dot.
has a dot behind it.
I don't know if those are maybe previous winners of some kind of Stanley Johnson or something, maybe. It's probably in
they
there
get the-
somewhere, guys.
Yeah.
Tony, can you talk about from a show the show chairs maybe, or how things go to be reclassified? So say something was seen at a show, is there like a responsibility, or if something was seen that, hey, maybe this should be considered in another category, is that usually done at the show level, or and who does that?
I think anybody could submit something for reclassification. I was surprised to see that Bloomquist Gene was, somebody wanted to reclassify it as a stellar, because it does have stellar characteristics, but I think it's more, more of an ID. I think it's classified closer to an ID. When we classify dahlias, when you're in the trial gardens, there are oftentimes is a long discussion about the form and which one it's closest to. A lot of these dahlias just do not fit exactly the definitions. They have characteristics of two different adjacent forms, and you have to decide which one you think is closest. And I'm glad they took a lot of that true to form stuff out of the judging, the module. I made a suggestion that was just over the top for young judges to be, but they had so much emphasis. Did you notice that, Ron?
I guess I didn't, Tony, no.
Yeah,
I mean,
'cause
it is
wrote
something,
I wrote a long thing and said I thought that was inappropriate. Because if you notice in the Guide to Judging Dahlias, trueness to form is not emphasized. I think it's a
Yeah.
factor, but it's one of the last things that you
I
should
did-
be evaluating, especially on the show tables.
And
uniformity.
And Tony, across the country in the various trial gardens, I get the impression that the classification is not not the same from trial, may not sometimes be the same from trial garden to trial garden. For example, maybe something is a stellar in one trial garden and an ID in another trial garden.
Exactly. And what could happen is that, those judges talked about it, and 2 out of the 3 senior judges thought it was more stellar in one trial garden than it was ID, but in another one, the judges thought it was more one way than the other. So there's definitely variability, Classification is really done for seedlings on seedling bench and for the trial gardens. And then when we exhibit them, we have to exhibit them as they're in that book. And as an exhibitor, I can tell you, I don't have any input to how they put that in that book. I've asked for input, and it just ends up what they decide they're going to put in there.
Usually,
It's the consensus.
usually if there is a controversy, Roger Walker and I would talk about it. That I'm reflecting back 5 or 6 years, however long ago. And we often did seek input from the originator as to what he or she thought was most appropriate.
But it's striking too, to me, the differences in the color. And Ron, you could speak to that. Man, color, you could have 6 different color chips from different trial gardens.
Yep.
And then you've got to decide which color chip goes in the CHD. But again, I don't think any of us want, 60 different supplemental listings in our books about how it grows in this area or that area.
Maybe not even one, huh?
Not even.
And Tony, question, is this the type of thing that you might be referring to as in the case of Embrace? I think it was because the color is in question with Embrace and it's been reclassified as a different color at some
I
point.
think Embrace and you know, maybe some of you, you know, Randy and Jim and Harriet are on the call too. I think Embrace was at one time classified as a yellow, and then it got classified as a bronze. But the big thing with Embrace is, and this goes back to classification, Embrace grows differently at different times of the year and in different heat conditions. And Embrace is a semi-cactus, but there are times when Embrace has no part of that petal that overlaps a quarter to a half. It just doesn't do it. It looks like Valley Pork. You could look at every petal, there's a space all the way. And John Menzel used to point that out all the time, that, you know, it's just not good. You know, it's not true to form a lot of times. You know, and that's where you get back to this whole thing about true to form, you know, or are we supposed to knock down dahlias because they decide they're not going to touch enough for our definition? And I don't have an answer to that. You guys can ponder that, you know, yourselves. But I mean, this is what does happen. We just don't always subscribe to our definitions.
The reclassification process is one that is organized through that classification committee. And once cultivars are identified through the classification committee, if they get enough of that kind of feedback that it needs to be reclassified, then the entire classification committee is asked to watch for that cultivar in all the shows that they go to and comment, take pictures, discuss what their impression of the classification was as they saw it at that show, and, you know, to come to a consensus on the basis of however many there are, 8 or 10 or 12 members of that committee. Anyhow, those folks reach a consensus, and if they conclude there's more often appearing as SC instead of whatever IC, it will be reclassified.
Concerning the dots.
The problem is a lot of times all these cultivars that are up for reclassification aren't commonly exhibited in all areas of the country. So somebody like me who's on the classification committee, a bunch of those dahlias I never see.
You don't see, yeah.
I can't see them. So I don't have any input on those, you know. Personally, I think way too much emphasis on true to form and classification. I think we classify so that we get a mental picture of about what it looks like, and also so that we can organize our shows into classes, and so we just can't put everything in one class and start to judge it. So it's a way for us to organize our shows so as judges we can get down to the finalists, you know. I think that's the main reason we classify, is to make it easier for us to judge them in shows, and for you to get a mental picture in your mind. If it's an FD or an ID, you know it's going to look a lot different than it is if it's going to be a incurve cactus, right?
Kathy may have something on the Embrace especially, but where they have the dot. Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay.
If you want, let her read this.
In the composite listing of dahlias, there is an Embrace. It's 3210 BB semi-cactus light blend yellow pink from 1972, and there's an Embrace with a dot. It's 3211 BB semi-cactus bronze 1 from 99. So I think, but I'm not sure, that the little dot means that there's dahlia with the same name, but I'm not positive because I don't know if there's any other.
That could be. You know what happened to me with Carmela Stoss that I'm introducing this year is that there was somebody I wanted to introduce that dahlia as just Carmela, and it's spelled with MELA, but someone years ago introduced a dahlia that was CARMELLA, and Karen called me and said, we think it's too close. There's already one out there that was Carmela, but even though the spelling was different, and so that's why I put the Stas on the end of it. I said, well, just put the last name on it, But they do try not to let that happen, but it obviously happens. It happens.
I was kind of taking a look at the Pacific Northwest supplemental a classification listing, and I was just curious if most of the differences were going to be like just just size. And then I noticed that High Zizzle was an anemone in the Pacific Northwest, but it's a novelty open center in the main part of the book. And I'm kind of curious as to just kind of thoughts about if we're having a supplemental listing, are we judging then based off of the description instead of comparing blooms like on the bench, to need to require that?
There's a lot of West Coast judges, and West Coast is a lot more into true to form, and that's why you have to put down when you judge at their shows, you have to have that supplemental listing with you at all times, so you can make sure that you put that in anemone or open-centered ones. You have to put it in the right class, and because there are a lot more. I've heard West Coast judges say, well, I'm not gonna give that the best ID because it's not an ID, it's a semi-cactus. And they'll do that on the show table. And I don't think that's really fair unless you really get down to, it's okay. You really get down to, where there's just no difference between them. And then you're going to say, well, I think this one is truer to form. I can see maybe making that argument. I rarely on the show table, guys, get down to the point where I'm knocking something because it's. I mean, I go back to that example of Wynn's Neon Dream, and I mean that's been a semi-cactus in this part of the country since I've ever grown it and since we've shown it, and it was classified as an ID, so all of us put it in the ID class, and it won like crazy. I mean, if somebody really, and is Todd still on the call?
No, he hopped off.
He hopped off. Well, he can tell you, that that there were judges that sometimes wanted to not put that. They were really going to knock that dahlia because they said it's a semi-cactus, and I'm not going to pick it as the best ID because it's not an ID. Well, that's not the exhibitor's fault, and that's not the bloom's fault, But there's different. I'm telling you, this is just one man's opinion. You start talking to people on the West Coast, and they'll, I've had these discussions with them. They don't see it like that. They think it's important for the dahlia to fit the form, and they think it's a big judging characteristic. I don't think most of us judge like that here in the Midwest.
So Tony, I have a question. Is it more important for what the dahlia looks like the day of the show that you're putting it on the table, or is it more important for what it's listed as in the book? And before you answer that, one thing that I want to bring up for all of us kind of newbies to this, especially those of us that are on Facebook and stuff like that, there are people that will post a picture of a dahlia. They'll say, hey, I can't remember what this is. What is this? And then there'll be people that pop in and they'll say what it is based on a Facebook picture, one picture. And we all know that these things grow differently in different parts of the country, as you said. They grow differently depending on the time of the season. And then sellers online will take whatever especially if Connie Thompson comes in and says, oh, that's an AC Ben. Well, now that seller says this is an AC Ben, and they sell these dahlias as AC Bens, and then people buy them, and they potentially are going to go show them. And it might not be AC Ben. It could be something that somebody's grown possibly from a seedling, but it looks an awful lot like AC Ben. But now sellers have sold it that way. And then if someone comes into a show listed as AC Ben, but it's not AC Ben. I guess I think over the last probably 5 to 10 years, the acquisition of stock and the way people are getting their dahlias has really changed from the way it was. So I guess, is it more important what the dahlia looks like on that day, or is it more important for what it's in the book based on the name? But then there's really no way to know, is there? I don't know.
I personally, the way I would judge it is I would judge as if it's a good dahlia. I would judge it on all our criteria against, the other flowers that are in there. And in the back of my mind, I know what a good dahlia is. I know what perfection is. And I would judge that dahlia, as that. I might go to the person and say, this is a great bloom, but I don't think it's AC Ben. You know what I mean? But I mean, if they bring the giant, it's the best. If it's the best giant there, it's the best giant there. That's my opinion, And I think you're going to see more misclassified stuff because tags get mixed up, and it's wrong to try to classify from the face of a picture, too. I mean, you could say, well, it looks like it could be, but you can't. I'm not good enough to do that.
From my point of view, it's pretty much impossible to be certain that the classification and the name that an exhibitor brings in is incorrect. Now, there are cases where it's entirely obvious, but if it's close, I mean, I don't think that anybody can, just say adamantly that that's AC Ben. If it's labeled something else, chances are we're gonna ask to be confirmed that it is as it's listed and enter it as it's classified.
I will say though, Chris, like somebody did dig into Castle Drive and Coralie because people were calling, I forget which, maybe Coralie, Castle Drive, or vice versa. And she dug into the photos, looked at the classification book, and was able to kind of distinguish between the two, and posted that on social media to be like, hey, you're selling this as the wrong thing, and was able to use the guide to address the form that she was seeing in those photos. So that's the only example I can think of that I've seen where somebody was able to kind of tell the two apart by using that classification guide. I have both, and when you have them together, it's completely obvious that it's two different flowers. But
well, it can be misleading when you have somebody that thinks that it's AC Ben, and it's not that close, and then they might pull a picture out of a show, an exhibit bloom, and post it as what they're selling, and it's not even going to be close, in quality. Right. So believe me, unless you like to open up your wallet and kick out the $40 every time, you better educate yourself and be a little careful.
Well, I agree with that. And I guess I was asking, so if there's something so let's say that somebody bought that, it's the wrong thing, but they come in, they look in the book, they write the 4 numbers down that AC Ben is, they put it in the section of the show that it is. And then, potentially because they're a newbie, they don't necessarily realize that isn't what it is. Is it more important to put it where it is based on what it looks like that day, or based on the numbers that you find in the book for the name you've been told what it is?
Well,
I'm not sure it should go to the classification table.
I think Ron addressed that, that as long as it's not too far off, we usually trust people to put the right name on it, but I mean, if you've got something you call AC Ben and it's 4 inches across, probably ain't AC Ben. Yeah. I'll tell you stories. I've given away thousands and thousands of dahlias over my life, and usually I have a list of 20 people that I have to send dahlias to and that want dahlias that I give away. And then they'll send me pictures because they lose I always put tags on them. They lose the tag and they say, what is this? And they'll send me pictures and it's my dahlias. And I don't grow like you guys where I grow 100 different kinds. I have a very small inventory. And I can't even tell them what dahlia it is because it's grown so differently. I said, well, I don't know. And you sure you got it from me? Yeah, you're the only dahlias I grow are the ones I got from you. And I can't identify it. And it's my stuff. So, I mean, it can be really hard. They do grow differently and different cultural, and the skill of the grower too makes a big difference. I mean, I've seen people take an A dahlia and grow it down to 3-4 inches, because they didn't disbud it. They just let it free bloom. So
Yeah. And I think our
Not very-
membership, I know some people have talked about how our membership has kind of exploded over the last couple of years. And hopefully that means that we get more people to our shows. And I guess I was just asking because I think it'd be pretty frustrating for people that had gotten stuff online and then they come and they think that it's, I don't know, if it's, they might not know the distinction. And I guess that's where I was asking, like, I think Ron answered my question, but I'm just saying going forward, I think one of our biggest struggles is where people are getting dahlias from, how they're being named by people. Some of it, it's I think it's going to be interesting over the next 10 years.
Well, a perfect example is like the stuff that comes from Swan Island, because Nick Getz is he's just a great guy. He does more for the dahlia. He's gotten a medal from the ADS and stuff, but they pretty much just they put out what's going to sell, and they've got that big catalog. And so many new growers grow their stuff, and they come in, and I'm on the classification chair, and I'm supposed to classify it. And I said, what is it? And they give me the name, and it's not in the composite. It's obviously not in the CHD. And so when I was out there, I asked them if I could have a catalog so that I could see it like what it was supposed to be. You get a novice grower, and sometimes they're not growing it to size because they're not doing cultural practices right. And so I like to at least have an idea of what it was supposed to look like, because some of them are really hard to classify, and then the names just aren't in the CHD. And that brings me to, one of another main concept tonight when you're a judge. We try, and Randy's on the call, and Jim and Harriet and Ron, and I think we all have the same philosophy as senior judges. Don't be a hard ass. These are your friends. They all want to learn. Everybody's trying their best. They wouldn't have brought the thing in a bucket if they weren't excited about it. And if you think it's misclassified, and that's why it's good to get there early, look at what you're judging, and maybe say, well, go find out what's going on, because I think all of us have that we want to get it right. We want to get it right. We want the best one to win. We want to get it right. We don't want to be disqualifying stuff because it doesn't fit the letter of the law. We really want to try to get it right. So, use good judgment. Be a good person. That good judges are good people.
Well said.
Yeah.
I kind of think that one of the key things too is to get it right. So we're passing on the right training onto people going, in the future, right?
Attitude is so important.
And so, it was interesting, Chris. I'm so glad you brought this stuff up, because the other day I was like, kind of like Ron, there's very few that I would say, okay, I'm confident that's a cafe au lait, right? And Gloriosa was one of those ones. I'm like, it's a yellow, variegated speckle. And then just the other day I came across, I'm like, Holly Hill, it's called Holly Hill Funhouse. And it kind of looks like Gloriosa. And I think, if we take that too much for granted, that there's some varieties that just really stand out, that we don't know all 60,000 dahlias, right? Like there could be something else out there. And just like you said, Chris, we could be perpetuating a cultivar it wasn't what it was, if we get the wrong name. And it's so interesting because then I geek out on this kind of stuff. And the same thing with like Cafe au lait, right? And I just went into the CHD and you see there's a Cafe au lait rose. And so where did that come from? And I'm kind of like, I'm so particularly curious about this cultivar because a lot of now the online sellers will distinguish the rose from the royal and the mini. So now you have Cafe au lait royal, you'll have Cafe au lait rose, and then all of a sudden this Cafe au lait mini popped up. And I'm like, where did this come from? Like, was it one person who found a small bloom on their plant and took a picture? Like, I'm curious because I love to get it to kind of evaluate it myself. But if you look in the CHD, it says Cafe au lait rose 2022. So it's a new one. And it's like, was that brought to a show written as Cafe au lait rose? Because obviously, like, that cultivar will vary in its coloring, right? Sometimes you get it more blush, sometimes you get it more purpley royal, or I guess sometimes you get it more rose now. Or is that just a sport? I don't know. And I'm so curious as to the background and how it came to be.
Well,
And there are some people that say Cafe au lait isn't good for show because it's a hot mess. It's a clock face. It can be totally different colors, but it is huge because of like the whole wedding flower scene type of thing. Because there was a podcast with two women from England. I think it's called Let's Grow Girls, and they had Halls of Hedon's. I think his name's David Hall, and he was doing a whole podcast on cuttings and pot tubers and field tubers and all this type of stuff, and he even talks about Cafe au lait and how it was huge, but from a show standard, nobody shows it in England because it doesn't do what a show dahlia is supposed to do, I think.
I'll tell you that this is absolutely true. It was just a few years ago, I kept hearing about this and this Cafe au lait, Cafe au lait, Cafe au lait. And finally, I think it was Sharon. I said, Sharon, what the hell's Cafe au lait? And she said, oh, it's a big wedding dahlia. And I said, what does it look like? I mean, I didn't even know what it was. I think it's a wonderful thing that's happened with the cut flower people and the interest in the garden dahlia. And a lot of these, I mean, they're opening up our eyes to a lot more varieties. I mean, most of the varieties that you guys mentioned, I still haven't heard of, because I'm in the exhibition end of it. And I only grow dahlias that have the genetics that I know judges will like and that'll do well against the ideal on our scorecards. But that doesn't mean there aren't, a million other beautiful blooms out there with great color and forms that are in between. And I think it's a wonderful thing what's going on right now. I really, really do. But I didn't even know what Cafe au lait was a few years ago.
I
Until
think
Sharon
it was
told me.
Martha Stewart's fault.
Yeah, I think that's what you told me, that she was promoting it or something. And then when I saw a picture of it, I kind of went, huh? I was just like, that's a famous dahlia?
And I think it was the first judging module that we were talking about. And I had said, all show dahlias can be garden dahlias, but not all garden dahlias can be show dahlias. And that's where
right on.
I think to me, that's one of the, again, I'm going to restate what I said. I think that's where it's going to get really interesting for the next 5-6 years. All these people that got into flowers because of COVID and because there's so many different access points to get your hands on tubers and stock. I wish everyone had the opportunity to have the wealth of knowledge that we have in the DSO from a show standard, because I guess I want it to be upheld to what it was. I don't want it to be I don't know. I don't want it to lose the characteristics of why it is so specific.
Grow what you like, grow what you enjoy looking at. It doesn't matter if it's a show flower or not. I always have a couple dahlias in my garden that I know will never ever win a show, but I grow them because I like them, because they're pretty to me and I like the way they look. And there's nothing wrong with having a whole garden of that, or a lot of garden of that, or a big portion of your garden. And I know Bob grows a lot of stuff I've never heard of, and he brings it in, and it's just beautiful, the colors and the combinations. He always bringing me and showing me something that I'd never heard of or seen.
Yeah,
Because he picks really pretty dahlias.
you're always at bringing the Jackie Evangelistas that I got from you, but mine are a little different color than yours, and it must be my soil or something, but that's what always happens.
Well-
First time I ever saw Cafe Olay was about 8-10 years ago, because I was always at that time looking for new things, and that was in those packets of those pot dahlias that you get from either Gales or Petites, that they come over from the Netherlands. That was the first time I ever saw those. So if any other catalogs like Swan or everything, has them in their catalog, that was years later after they came out in those packets, those dahlia packets that dahlias are all busted up and everything.
Well, I think the bottom line is that most of us are gardeners at heart, and we all, dahlia may be our favorite flower or whatever, but we all still appreciate sunflowers and zinnias, and all these other blooms. And a lot of them are open centered or they have weaker centers, but it's the colors that we like, and the color of the foliage and the way they grow and how they fit in the landscape. And dahlias, fortunately have that huge array of form and color, and there's nothing wrong with appreciating things that just don't exhibit well. Nothing wrong with that at all. And we have to embrace that fact. We're here to tell you what the standards are for exhibition, but that doesn't mean that we have a market on the standards of beauty.
So going back to the standards, I have a question. Is there a standard that you think decides more categories, or is there a standard that decides a specific category more? So let's say, like, in general, you guys, some of you judged, tens and tens and tens of shows. Is there a standard that's typically the deciding factor on a certain characteristic or something? Like, you get down to 3 Bs, is there a standard that you guys typically fall back on to separate the best?
Well, I think maybe in a way, Chris, the whole conversation that we've had over the last month, or is it 6 weeks, whatever it is, kind of summarizes the importance of considering these 6 or 7 characteristics in kind of a systematic way. And I think you have to, Tony said it a couple of times, and you have to be disciplined in the way you approach that. And I think that there is no single answer to your question. It's not a single standard. It's a sum of 6 or 8 characteristics that you kind of have to balance one with the other.
I think
That's my nickel.
I agree. I agree completely, and that's so true. I think the only time that it gets down in best of show judging, when you've got a whole honor table full of just incredibly good blooms. I mean, incredibly good blooms. And if you notice, most of the time, the bloom that'll win like the top award or the top 2 awards, king and queen, or on down, how we group them in the sizes. A lot of time it is that wow factor, just how that thing grabs you. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, as judges. When you get down to that level, you're really looking at the one that you just go, it just like blows you away, you know. Not to say that when you're judging a head table, you shouldn't actually rejudge the things, you know, give them a good look on all angles so you can distinguish. But a lot of times those flowers are so good that it really is just the balance and the proportion and the way they grab you, you know. And
I agree.
again, it's a judgment thing, and you'll have if you look at the judging on head table stuff, so many, you'll get best of show judging. There'll be 5 senior judges, and the grand champion will be decided by a 3-2 vote of 5 senior judges. It just goes to show you, it's judging, you know, it's judging.
I agree that the deciding factor for me will probably be when you get 3 or 4 pretty equal blooms, is just where you were at, Tony. It's going to be balance, presentation. You know, that is the frame of the picture of that bloom. And once you establish which one of those blooms, your presentation, your balance is all going to play out, and that's what's going to frame the best.
Well said. Have we beat this up enough?
Hey, I got one question. I really do, and it's a judging question. It's a mechanics question. I led a team in the Worcester National tournament or the show, and we're going down through there, and if you guys remember down there at Worcester, some of the areas could get a little bit dark, and actually had a guy pull out his cell phone and turn the light and direct it down on top of the bloom in the center, whatever. And my comment was that I thought it was inappropriate to put artificial light right on the bloom, and I felt we should move the vase and the bloom into appropriate lighting. Where do you guys come down on that?
100% with you, Randy. And I think that I absolutely hate staging in a poorly lit area, because you can't judge in poor light and you can't stage in poor light. So you have to have them in good light. And like you said, the beam of a flashlight is really going to give you shadows, and it's going to distort the whole thing, plus giving artificial colors. So that's why I'm such a big fan of judging tables. Get those things away from the clutter, get them in good light, put them on a neutral background, step back and really judge them. Because I mean, when you get down to the best of the best, you really have to be careful. You can't be haphazard. Give them a good look, neutral background from a distance, and go over them really well. Trying to judge good flowers with all these flowers in the background is tremendously difficult, I think, because of the eye clutter, the visual clutter that you're having to look through. I mean, a lot of people can do it because they can block that out, but a lot of us, myself included, I'm not that good at that. I like to get them out where I can see them.
Ron, do you have any comment?
Well, I guess I'm thinking, Randy, is that the one where if you put that light on it, you could see down into the center?
Well, the center was there. No, I don't think that was.
Oh, okay. I had that experience recently, and we ended up putting it where we could look at it without having an artificial light pounding right down into it. And I think you could barely still see the center, but it made more sense. I mean, it was a more reasonable way to do it than with a cell phone flashlight.
Well, there's always a question about artificial light. So,
Sure.
You certainly don't want to introduce artificial light when you're judging a presentation. I don't think.
I don't either. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go back to big picture for a minute, Tony. I guess I want to say to everybody involved, thanks very much for joining this. It's by no means the only judging things that we'll get through this summer, but I hope it provided a basis for some of the folks that are just getting started, and I think it's exciting stuff, and I applaud Tony for his role in putting it all together, and appreciate all his hard work in putting this together tonight too. So thanks, Tony. Thank you
Well,
all.
thank you, Ron. I think we tag teamed them pretty good, and it was so nice to have Randy on too, keeping us
Yep.
in check. You know, it's really good.
For sure.
Thank you all for participating too. And like I said, we'll do as much as you guys want, and we got a lot of stuff planned for you at the, coming up to. We'll be talking judging at the picnic, and then again at Petiti's. So, and then of course we're going to judge these shows together. So that's where you really learn.
We'll have a good time, guaranteed.
You'll have fun.
Awesome.
So
Thank you. Thank
also
you.
about this recording to everyone as well. And Ron and Tony, thanks so much. I feel like it's a privilege sometimes to you guys talk and teach us. So I really appreciate it.
Well, it's a pleasure, and there's
Absolutely.
nothing better in life than to be able to pass on what you've learned. There's no sense taking it to the grave.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I want you guys to pick up the torch and figure it out. And I want you to do for the next generation. Because there's a lot of you out there that are going to be the next generation.
That's
We
for
wish
sure.
So
we would've had
glad.
this a
I
long
just
time
think we
ago.
got such a nice, strong society. And Carol and Misty, you guys are doing a wonderful job up there too. I
Yeah,
can't
thanks
wait
for-
till you guys get your senior judges and really get rolling.
Thanks for being with us.
Yeah. for sure.
Y'all treat us like family, so thank you.
We
I
all
really
are
appreciate
family.
it.
We are family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Great,
you very
great.
much to each and every one of you.
All right, guys. Well, it's my bedtime,
night.
so I must stop this. But
Thank